Okay, we're going to go on, stay on schedule. So, our next speaker, Wolfgang Goerlich, is a hacker strategist. He's the advisory CISO for Cisco Secure. Prior to his role, he led IT and IT security in the healthcare and financial services verticals. He's also held vice president positions at several consulting firms, leading advisory and assessment practices. He is an active part of the security community, co-founding and organizing security conferences and events. Wolfgang regularly advises on and presents on the topics of security architecture and design, identity and access, management, data government, secure development life cycles, zero trust security, and more. So I am going to welcome Wolfgang to the stage with And the Clouds Break, Continuity in the 21st Century.
Thank you so much. Let me first make sure my clicker works here. Ha, it does. Okay, great. Back works too. Yeah, we're going to be talking about disaster recovery. We're going to be talking about business continuity. As already mentioned, I did a lot of consulting in my past. I worked in healthcare, I worked in financial services. So I got to build these programs, and then I got to advise folks in these programs way back in the early 2000s. Now I get to say at the turn of the century, which sounds much more impressive than it felt at the time. At the turn of the century, we're building disaster recovery solutions. And it's interesting because 20 years later, it feels like we still make some of the same mistakes. So I'm going to share some of those mistakes and share some context. Now, 2 decades ago, we didn't really have good data. We didn't really have good insights as to what made a program good or bad. We had some gut feel. We had some expertise. We were like, this worked and that didn't. And that person seems to be going okay. And oh my goodness, don't talk to them. The week they've had, right? We had a lot of those types of stories. We didn't have really good data. So in this talk, I'm going to be referencing a survey that Scientia did in partnership with Cisco. So Scientia Institute does a lot of different security studies, fantastic analysis of data. They worked with Cisco on a security outcome study, effectively asking what works in security, right? Reviewed around 5,000 people, double blind, so they didn't know us, we didn't know them. Crunched the data and gave us some results. And surprisingly, business continuity and disaster recovery jumped out of that. Resilience jumped out of that. We thought, what people were doing that would make a good security program would be like cloud security, or it would be like SASE, or it would be zero trust, or it would be something cutting edge. No, one of the main drivers was continuity and disaster recovery. Weird. For those of us who've been doing it for a while and kind of feel like, we're the dowdy cousin that no one wants to talk to. It was a little bit weird, but yet a little bit reaffirming. So I'm going to talk about some of the data today in showing where we need to go when we build our programs. First off, in terms of like gut checks, all right? In 2016, 2017, 2018, no one really thought there'd be a pandemic. The idea of like we should do pandemic planning was something that people were like, really? Why? Why would we do that? Like, no, but we should, for continuity and recovery. Okay, I'll humor you. But no one really thought, and no one really were engaged. At the same time, if you remember, like Walking Dead was popular. There were some things on television people were finding fun. There's some good movies out there, like Z Nation. Good in air quotes. I mean, that's a popcorn movie. We can debate whether or not that was actually a good movie, but there were some movies about that. And so what my team did was we used the CDC, the United States CDC, zombie preparedness kit. If you haven't seen it, it's kind of cool. It walks you through what happens if there's a zombie outbreak. And we thought, this is great. I'm going to prepare folks for the pandemic. And we built some plans. We did some tabletops. I'm a big fan of tabletops. Get me in a room, get me telling some stories, get me a good table, preferably with a nice top, and some coffee. We're going to have a good time. So when the pandemic happens, when 2020 happens, I thought, this is good. This is my chance. I'm going to reach out to some of the folks I worked with. I'm going to be like, hey, what happened? We did this zombie preparedness kit. And they're going to be like, Wolf, you have no idea. You saved us. And I'm going to feel good about myself, right? I'm going to have some good case studies. We're going to have some good anecdotes that I could share one day at BSides Cayman. However, I'm sorry to report that wasn't the case. I reached out to folks. I'm like, you remember? How did you guys do? You remember we did the zombie thing? We did the, and they're like, oh yeah. Funny, I forgot about that. Like, you forgot? Like, well, I was busy at the time. People were going home. I didn't know what was going on. We figured it was 2 weeks. Then it was 2 months. I don't know. And to a person, no one remembered the plan. And I think that first was humbling because again, I'd spent a few years prior to joining Cisco working on this. But that also really, in my mind, illuminated part of the problem with continuity and recovery. We all have plans. We all have tabletops. And then something happens and it doesn't work. So I'm going to talk through today how to prepare, how to get ready. But I'm going to encourage you guys, please, 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 put this in action in your organizations. Test it, keep it fresh. Because if it goes too long, whoop, it's gone. Even if it's something as exciting as fleeing zombies, it's gone. All right, I'm going to talk about continuity and recovery in general. I'm going to delve into some common mistakes where people go wrong, including, again, forgetting there's a plan. And I'm going to talk on part 3 about how to use this information strategically, how to use this information to do more than just recover, but to position the security team to have good conversations with the executive team, to get sponsorship and buy-in, to build better relationships with our peers. So, part 1, continuity and recovery with cloud services. Now, some things, of course, haven't changed. In the beginning of doing continuity and recovery, if you're just getting into it, if you're wondering what to do, you need to do a business impact analysis. What do I have, what it means? We're going to talk about that in depth in this session. We need to protect against impacts, not just events. A lot of good planning is built around what happens if there's a hurricane? What happens if we lose power? What happens if there's an adversary? What happens if there's malware? And then the scenario comes down and plays out. It's not just like what we thought it was. This is a little bit to the left, a little bit to the right. When I was in the financial services, our CFO used to always ask me, Wolf, what happens if an asteroid falls from the sky and takes out the data center? And I'd say, Peter, I would retire. I'd be done if I'm not in that data center. But when we actually had an outage, we had planned so hard for a full down, like everything is down, that when things were partially down, we had corrupted data and services coming up out of order and services trying to talk back to the services that were failing in the data center that was affected. It was really interesting to see that how we had over-optimized from that scenario, and it really resulted in trouble getting back up. So it's important to think about the impacts, short-term, long-term, medium-term, of things being done instead of over-focusing on events. It's also important to focus on a few proven strategies. I'll get to why that is in just a minute. Now, some things have changed, right? 2 decades ago, we wouldn't all get to declare, a international holiday when AWS was off. AWS is down today. What are we doing? We're playing video games. We're waiting until they get back up and until the services that rely on AWS get back up, and then our services can come back up, right? We didn't necessarily have that idea. Watson of IBM, not the Watson mainframe, the Watson who founded IBM, who the mainframe was named after, once famously said, there's a market for maybe 10 to 50 computers in the world, right? He's like, no one wants a whole bunch of computers. And everyone laughed, and we tout that out again and again, like, he thought they were going, but we have so many more computers. But when you think about it, we're really down to like 4 main computers these days, right? We're on Azure or AWS or GCP. We're really down to this tight consolidation, which hadn't happened before. So we have that to contend with. We also have the fact that a lot of assets are outside of our controls. In the golden olden days, it was my employee on my device, sitting in my office, on my network, talking to my data center on an application that I partially wrote. Of course, today, that application is probably SaaS. If there is a data center component, that's infrastructure as a service, both outside of our controls. Very few people are going to office anymore. Very few people are even on corporate-owned equipment anymore. Oftentimes it's BYOD. So we've got a lot of assets out of our control that we need to take account for. There's new strategies that exist, which I'll cover, and more, it's a team sport. It can't only be IT or can't only be IT security who are overseeing this, especially when we have supply chain issues, especially when we have DevOps teams and SRE teams. So some things have changed, some things haven't. When we talk about business impact analysis, it's really where we need to start. I think this is the most underlooked aspect of Blue Team, the almost underlooked aspect of organizational security. What do we actually have and what does it mean? And what does it mean from a business process perspective, right? What is our business process? Who's our key people? What technology are they using? Do they have facility dependencies? And what does that data flow look like? Mapping those things out. And then taking that data flow and mapping out further into the enabling IT. Our ability as security professionals to say any nut and bolt within a data center, any virtual instance within infrastructure and service, any DNS and IP address pairing in the cloud on a SaaS application, what does that mean to my business? If I'm in the business of funds, money management, it should be about the funds. If I'm in the business of manufacturing, it should be about the widgets. Can we draw that line? I was telling you about how some things have changed and some things haven't. One of the genesis of this was I was doing a business continuity and disaster recovery exercise for a headhunting firm out of Chicago. And so we're top floor of Chicago, skyrise, beautiful view. People are coming in from different parts of the business. And I was letting my consulting team do most of the interviews. I was sitting in on it. And we had positioned ourselves with a window behind so that people come in and sit and they'd have the light in their eyes. Much like I have the light in my eyes now. It's a good feeling. It's a good feeling to have. No, it's not. It's like those sort of like those like mafia intimidation seers. Like, what do you do? Where did you hide the money? What applications are you using? Very, very effective when you're doing BIA. Also, completely by accident, that's where we sat. We realized halfway in that this was a bad choice as everyone was squinting at us and trying to answer the questions. But I kept saying, okay, what happens if the technology goes down? And I realize you use this SaaS app or that SaaS app. I realize you use Workday or ServiceNow or whatever. Maybe what happens if that app goes down? They're like, well, then we don't work. I'm like, no, but I mean, what's your like fallback procedure, right? In the old days, we had to be an operations team. Like, no, we don't work. Like, but what do you do? And finally, this one person's like, they're an accountant. They're like, Wolf, you need to understand. We're not going to haul out the big piece of metal and put your card down and the blue to run a credit card. We're an international company. That's not how we work. If that enabling IT is down, we are down. Like, well, that sucks. I mean, that makes our plan easier. If you're down, you're down. But it doesn't allow for much flexibility. Unfortunately, that's where a lot of us are today. There's not a lot of slack in the system. So we have to know what we have. We have to know what it means. Now, I will say, before I jump to the next slide, how much do we need to know? Is it 10%? Is it 50%? I don't know. For a long time, when you would talk to someone in business continuity disaster recovery, up until today, when you talk to a security professional, they'll say something like the following. We've got really good controls around our crown jewels. And you'd be like, oh yeah, what about everything else? Oh, so like just your crown jewels. No, we got really good controls. Just around the crown jewels. You get kind of so that wink, like don't ask me any more questions, right? One of those things. How much is your crown jewels? Is that 5%? Is that 10% of an environment? Not very much. But maybe that's okay. Maybe if we just get those systems up, we're in a good spot. Maybe if we just recover those systems. When I was at the money management firm, that was exactly the tack I took. We recovered our crown jewels. And we had this backup war room. We had monitors and everything you would imagine, like, you know, if you've seen Wolf of Wall Street, it was that thing. And yes, my name's Wolfgang. There may be a Wolf of Wall Street joke. I'll take it. But that's not my point. Point is, imagine that. And all my traders come in, and we've simulated that asteroid coming. All my traders come in, they sit down, And they pull up to their desk and screens start popping and charts start shining and the market starts trending and we're online and we're wired into New York. And I'm like, yes. I'm feeling even better about this than the zombie story, if I'm telling you the truth. I'm like, yes, we did it. And the head trader turns around and goes, okay, this is great, but where's all my plugins? I go, what do you mean? He goes, well, you don't think I actually like click on things to trade. I need all my plugins. I'm like, you never told me about plugins. There was no survey that said you had plugins. He goes, well, I told you. I just need everything on my desktop, but we're on this desktop. So we missed those plugins. Those were not within that 10%. So we haven't known how much we need to recover for a long time. Scientia looked at this in their study. They're like, how much of our systems and scope should we recover? And they plotted it against how likely organizations will report to have successful recovery. And as you can see, one of the things that really surprised me is the most likely to maintain business continuity were people who are doing 80% or more of their systems. I would have figured 20%, but 20, 50, up to 80, almost flat, 80% or more is where we saw the big jump. That, I don't know how to wrap my head around, because how do we get 80% of those applications if we don't have good visibility into what those are? I think that starts with things like CASB, that starts with having a more of a dynamic asset inventory as opposed to a static asset inventory, that starts with having more conversations with folks to figure out what we're missing. But that is very concerning to me, because there's a bunch of blind spots that we miss. I told that story about, oh yeah, everyone came and sat down. It's like, where's my plugins? I told that story to a CISO I was coaching recently. It was about a year ago. He's like, oh, stop listening like halfway to that story. He's like, don't worry about it. Like, don't worry about it? He's like, yeah, don't worry about it. I go, okay, good. He goes, I already figured out browser plugins. I audit for those. That is good. That is good. But that also misses the point. The point wasn't, let's add one more layer of visibility. The point is, there's always going to be something we don't see. How do we get to the reality of what we don't see? Part of that is asking people, serving people, assessing their devices, having visibility. But the point is, we need to be humble about what we know, especially if we're trying to get to 80%. Okay. Next thing, threat scenarios. Threat scenarios in that asteroid. We need to be very careful not to build specific plans for asteroids and earthquakes and fires and floods, with the caveat that I am in where I am. Hurricanes are a real thing. Hurricanes, we should probably have a very specific plan for. But in general, when organizations are building out their plans, they should look at these threat scenarios and group them by effect. Otherwise, we end up with very big plans, conflicting things, conflicting procedures, and the longer a plan is, we know the harder it is to maintain, and therefore the more likely it is to be out of date. We then look at the different processes and we tier those. Okay, if payroll and HR are down, marketing down, what does that mean? It's probably about the same impact to the business. If production is down, if I can't trade, if I'm in healthcare and I can't do patient health and safety, if I can't deliver healthcare, that's a much worse, much larger impact. So we want to tier those up. So we've got a few different things. Coming out of that, we need to build a strategy. But first, what's important is the disaster is the impact. When we think about resilience, resilience isn't nothing bad ever happens, right? Resilience isn't we can get punched in the face and we can keep going. I had a storage array way back in the day. I had a storage array. And we partnered with this organization because it was super fast. But for whatever reason, they had bought a bad batch of drives. And we were losing a couple drives a day. And the drives would fail, and we had a big stockpile of other drives. We'd pull the BAM drive, plug in the new drive, rebuild the RAID array, and go. And this went on for about 6 weeks. One of the most stressful periods of my life. Every day losing a couple hard drives. And, like a couple weeks in, you're starting to get used to, it's fine. We lost 3 today. I'm like, okay, that's fine. And like, no, you need to understand the 3 we lost, if we lose one more in the next 12 hours, we're going to be down. I'm like, oh, I was really used to just being 2 being okay, and 3 doesn't seem that far from 2. So yeah, it shouldn't be, but it hit this disk, and this disk, and now my RAID's at risk if I lose one more disk. And so you're just sitting through the night going, please don't fail, please don't fail, please don't fail. But we made it through. We actually didn't have an outage. We were very fortunate. Now, that's resilience, right? We had failures. We had things break again and again and again. But that was not a disaster. The disaster is not the event. The disaster is the impact. So when we think about DR, what we're trying to do is mitigate that impact. When we think about DR, we're trying to say, this is going to break, that's going to break, the other thing's going to break, and that's going to be unavailable. How do we make sure that the organization doesn't feel that financially? So we do that with some strategies, and I'm going to cover a few in just a minute, but think about a strategy as something that looks at the various scenarios and maps them to the various recovery tiers. So if we've got those scenarios happening on the assets for those recovery tiers, we know what to do. Think about a strategy that way. Now, when things like the pandemic happen, black swan events, when things like, I had an email system fail at one time, and it was just the stupidest thing. One guy executed the wrong command because he thought he was on task and he was on prod. And after that, they're like, we will never lose email again. And we ended up with like the biggest email cluster in like the Midwest of North America. It was stupid. It was stupid. But when these black swan events happen, the executive teams, they want to make sure that that never happens again. What's really important with black swan events, I believe, so I think good security is built on the wings of black swan events. We take that black swan event, we abstract a lesson, we build a strategy on it that would sure address the black swan, but also address other bird-shaped problems in our environment. We build strategies that take what they're interested in and we make it important, right? Make the interesting important to make the important interesting. That is the trick of security. We take those concerns that the executive team has and turn them into a strategy that can address multiple different scenarios and tiers. That's really the trick to funding this and making the whole wheels go around on these programs. All right, from a strategy situation, there's some myths, old myths. We don't need backup, we've got RAID. We've got the data striped. That works great until there's corrupted data, and now I've got corrupted data everywhere. We don't need backup, we've got replicated data. That's awesome. Now I can take the corrupted data from one data center and send it to another. That's great. If I'm in AWS East, I've got corruption in AWS West. Sweet. We don't need backups. We got image level backups. Awesome. Try to restore one file off of a terabyte VM off a snapshot. That's terrible. Also, bonus points if you're trying to do it at the exact same time that everyone else is in the cloud console trying to recover something. There are some new myths. I don't need backup. I've got infrastructure as a service. I went into multiple different conversations with organizations that say, you know what, it's all right. I've got infrastructure as a service. They're handling everything. Like, you realize it's a shared responsibility model, right? I mean, you've got your responsibility. No, it's good because everything's running, and if I need anything, it's in my S3 bucket or whatever. Okay, what if the bucket is corrupted or emptied or any number of things? We don't know. Similar with cloud instance snapshots. I've seen, especially with these site failovers, where we're like, okay, we timed it. To rebuild and reload our environment from snapshots, it takes 15 minutes. Great. Now, AWS goes down, AWS comes up, everyone's trying to bring stuff up. It's no longer 15 minutes, it's now in the terms of hours. And they're trying to explain why they had an SLA for 15 minutes. We've got to be aware of these myths. We've got to be aware of these concerns. There's some new strategies that are evolving, of course. Some good strategies like failover connections. How do I get to my environment? Direct connect, express route, those sort of things. Backup recovery continues to be a good strategy. Being aware of a lot of the open source tools will have backup and recovery in their freemium model, but won't encrypt it, or will have very limited backup and recovery. I can back up everything, but I can't back up at the item level. You want to be able to dig into the open source software you're using, figure out where those edges are, and make sure that you got the ability to not only back up, but also restore item level, also encrypt that data. I've seen too many incidents, especially in talking to red teams. They're like, oh yeah, we just stole all their backups, got all their data. It's perfect. There's no controls that way. Ground to cloud still exists. That was one of the first infrastructure as a service moves that I did with Azure. If anything failed in my Hyper-V environment, spun it up in Azure. Awesome. We're moving away from that now, of course, as more and more workloads are in the cloud. It doesn't really make sense, but there's still those possibilities. Region to region is really where it's at, making sure that you've got WS East and West and those sort of things, regional recovery options when something fails. Manual processing, is that even a thing? Maybe. I like in manual processing the failover ability, right? So if my identity provider is not available, my customers can't log in, can they still purchase things? Maybe they can't log in and see their order history, but they can still log, buy something with their credit card. Those types of sort of gently degraded services, I think, are a good way of looking at things. Or insurance, right? Insurance is always a thing. Cybersecurity insurance is still a thing. How long will be a thing, we'll have to see. With all the changes in the market and ransomware hitting it all the time. But of course, insurance is always a recovery strategy. An important thing is to do as few of these strategies as possible and do them very well. The fewer we have, the better we can make sure that everyone knows them, socializes them out, practice them, those sort of things. There's also a couple do-nothing strategies I really liked. I was helping a SaaS company get certified through high tech. And my team kept asking them, well, how do you back up this? How do you back up that? And they kept saying, we don't. Why would we? We don't. We have an Ansible script. We don't. And so finally, I was really pushing my team. I'm like, that's not an answer. You can't just say we don't. We have to have an answer. And so I sat down with the lead DevOps architect. I'm like, look, you can't just tell me you don't. What are you doing with this? He goes, well, if this is a Kafka pipeline, any data and it's immutable, any one of these hosts we can spin up in a heartbeat. If we lose any one of them, doesn't matter. If we lose all of them, that's probably a short-term problem. But I'm never going to recover from backup. And that was the first time I heard of what SonoU has called the die pattern. If you haven't looked at this, highly recommend it. Distributed, makes sense, right? Multiple different nodes. Immutable, nothing on the node itself changes. This is really good for data pipelines. This is really good for microservices. Nothing on that host changes. And ephemeral, once we're done with it, we can wipe it out and destroy it, and it has no impact on the environment at all. Do nothing, right? I don't have to do anything with that environment. Just let it sit, and if I got to rebuild it with an Ansible script, I can. Cool. I like that. I think moving forward into the future, we'll probably see like a layer of die pattern around most of our infrastructures because most of them are still going to have data and things we need to maintain. We still have DevOps people who are doing a lot of in-house configurations and getting on the systems and wiring them up and loading all that sort of stuff that we don't want them to do, but they're still doing. So that's one approach. Another approach, of course, is that CI/CD pipeline approach, which is if I lose it, that sucks, but I can run a script and I can rebuild it. Awesome approach. There are scaling issues if everyone's trying to run it. There also is an issue where, and I ran into this, the poor guy. He was using this pattern, and he was using Jenkins, and they lost some systems. He's like, no problem. Know exactly what to do. I will now run my Jenkins script to rebuild it on another cloud. Really quite clever, multi-cloud DR, awesome. He went to run Jenkins and realized Jenkins had the same dependency as his infrastructure did and was down. He had no way to actually run and restore. So key thing there is when we're automating, right? When we're using automation, we need to remember that automation means everything. Include that in tier 0. Make sure that's not on the same fault path as your underlying infrastructure. And that really covers disaster recovery. It's bottom up. We want to make sure we don't get lost in the weeds. We want to make sure that we know what our technology is. We've got a few key proven strategies to recover that technology, and we know what it means to the business so we can tier it accordingly. Next thing, I want to talk about some mistakes that people make in business continuity. When I was doing consulting, my team read 176 different continuity plans. which I will now summarize the mistakes of 176 continuity recovery plans. Also, I would encourage you to never read 176 continuity plans. Every one of the team members on that team has since left that company. I cannot blame myself. But here were the top 3 failures we saw again and again and again. Wrong person. This one did not surprise me. When I was at the money management firm, the business continuity and disaster recovery was owned by this lovely lady who was a project manager in the operations team. And she had no visibility into the technology. She had no understanding of the technology. She had no visibility into the compliance requirements. She had no understanding of those compliance requirements. She had no visibility into the executive team. She had no sponsorship at that level. She just was really good at being a PM and owning this document. Not good, not good. I oftentimes see this too in the IT side. I was talking to Preston, who put out the book on data recovery in the cloud. Really brilliant guy, highly encouraged. It's out through O'Reilly. He's like, you know what I find is that oftentimes business or backup and recovery is pushed to the junior IT guy. Like, congratulations, you're fresh out of college. You get the backups. It's like a junior task, right? And I was like, you know, it's funny because oftentimes in business continuity, we do the exact same thing. Congratulations, you're out of college. We need you to update these reports and these forms and this plan, right? We push it down to very junior people. And then we wonder why it doesn't scale and it's not appropriate, it's not accurate. So top failure is having BC and DR owned by the wrong person. Next one is having the wrong technology. So I say that I am protecting my databases. I got SQL in Azure. I'm protecting my Azure SQL because I'm using a bunch of Palo Altos. I'm like, wait a minute, what? Yeah, our Palo Altos, we got load balancers. Okay, that's great. The resiliency, props. But how does that protect your database? Well, our application won't go down and people can get to it. Okay, but what about your database, right? Wrong technology. We need to make sure that we've got the right technology supporting those systems. And the last one is the wrong drills. That lovely lady I mentioned who was a project manager, she really was great. Did an awesome job on what she was given, did an awesome job every time I worked with her. Her drill, the drill that was reported up to SEC for business continuity before I took over the plan, was the fire drill. The fire drill? Yeah, we do it, twice a year fire drill. The fire drill is how you're saying that we got business continuity and disaster recovery? Yeah, because I do it, and I've got people, I've got floor captains. Like, that is awesome. Doesn't tell me a thing about our IT, but cool. So wrong person, wrong technology, wrong drills. Who's the right person? Did not have good data on this for years. Again, a lot of gut check. No one really knew. This data was from that Scientia study I mentioned earlier, and they found that there was a drastic increase in the ability for organizations to get up and back operational if there was board level oversight of the program and if there was C-suite ownership and CISO involvement. So we want to make sure the board knows what we're doing to keep the technology up. We want to know that the C-suite has engagement and sponsorship and supports what we're doing, especially if we have to take time away and do drills and interviews and those sort of things. And we want to make sure that the CISO is ultimately the person accountable for it. That's what the data shows. All right, other ways that we saw these plans mucked up when we did this massive study. I already mentioned this one, shared responsibility. It's outsourced, I don't worry about it. Okay, shared responsibility is a thing. We got to make sure that it's not that abstracted. Non-standard language, again, very common if we got junior people doing this, but mixing up recovery time objective, recovery point objective, not really understanding what ROI means. Any sort of like non-standard language I see in a plan is sort of like a, like a code smell if you're a developer. It's that sort of thing. I'm like, all right, this doesn't smell right. I know there's probably something rotten in this plan. Non-standard approach. I'm not saying we need to follow NIST or ISO 22301. I'm not saying we need to follow those. They're very heavy frameworks meant for international companies, meant for very large scale companies. But they do have good life cycles. They do have good processes, right? It should be a similar approach to that. If we're just making up something that doesn't align with the standard, again, doesn't smell right. Using HA as opposed to recovery, I love me some high availability, but that's not going to get our data back. That's not going to keep our systems running. Having overly broad plans. My favorite was something bad happened. Address the bad thing. Bring systems back online. That's a great plan. 3 points. Recognize something bad happened. Fix the bad thing. Bring things online. Okay, I can work with that. Can you give me an example? They couldn't, of course. Like, well, we'll figure that out on our own. Like, I don't think you've really tested those strategies, and I don't really think that you know what you're going to do if it's that vague. The worst is the opposite. Very, very specific plans. Bad thing happens. Therefore, Joe executes this command on this virtual machine at this time, and then Sally does this command in the AWS management console, and then Jane is going to. I'm like, wait a minute. That's very, very specific. When was the last time this was maintained? Is it up to date? Is it accurate? What happens if Jane's not available? What happens if the management console is unavailable? What happens? How did that virtual machine even get there? Do we account for it being restored? Right? That black swan effect I mentioned, that we get really focused on just addressing that black swan instead of looking at bird-like threats, we can fall into this trap. And then finally, handled in isolation. If we've got different asset management programs and categorizations, if we have different risk rankings, like our risk function has tiered our applications differently than our BCDR function, or our BIA function has a different tiering than our SOC function. That sort of handled in isolation really indicates that we're probably not recovering 80% of the environment because there's probably not good tie-ins with the asset folks. We're probably not really doing good risk ranking because there's not good tie-ins with that. And if we got to get a whole bunch of teams together really fast to figure things out, we're going to be talking a different language. We're going to be looking at things in a different way, and that's going to slow down recovery. So, all that to say, a few good strategies. Right person, board level oversight. Right technology, depending on the scenario. And then having a good test, right? Having a good plan for that and testing that plan again and again and again. Again, how often do we test these plans? Is this biannually we do a drill? Is this annually? Is this quarterly? What's the good amount? I used to really like tabletops every month, and then one quarter we would do an exercise for a different strategy, and then 2 of those 4 we would select as evidence for the SEC. That's how I did it. But again, this is like, hey, what do you do? How do you do it? Okay, I do it this way. We really didn't have good data. Scientia asked the question, how many events are you doing on a monthly basis for your plans, and provide us some insight into that. One of the things that immediately jumped out at me is I figured 1 or 2 would be good. It's actually 5. 5 is the magic number. 5 events per month makes an organization 2.5 times more likely to maintain resiliency. That's a lot. that is a lot. I don't want to be pulling the plug, a couple times a week. That doesn't make sense. I don't want to be doing full tabletops a couple times a week. That probably doesn't make sense. When I started peeling behind this data and talking to organizations that had 5 or 10 events a week, what I found was something differently. What they were actually doing was they were aligning those events and embedding them in the business and aligning them in a way to push information up. So if you think about Bloom's taxonomy, right? If you think about Bloom's taxonomy, we don't need everyone in the business to be creating and evaluating our BCDR plans. We probably just need them to remember we have one. See also my zombie problem. We probably need a few people to remember and understand who to call when something's on fire or not working. So we can start lining those up to different activities. And here's some of the ways that could look. For the process owner, the business process owner, right? Finance, accounting, their team meetings are a perfect opportunity for us to embed, jump in once every couple months or once every couple quarters and say, oh, by the way, remember we're the BCDR function, supported by the board. Board is interested in this. We just want you to know, here's what the plan is at a high level. When this happens, here's how you contact us. That can be something that the DR team is doing monthly, but if you've got 12 processes, that's once a year where you're making that cycle. All you want those folks to do is remember and understand that there's a plan. For the system owners, AWS owner, DevOps team, whoever owns my ERP system, whoever owns my HRMS system, what we're doing again is looking at the team meetings or standing all hands where we can get engaged. What we're doing is reviewing the plan, making sure they're aware of it. We're also engaging them probably quarterly, maybe a little less often or more often, depending on the criticality of that system. We're engaging them in BCDR meetings and doing a tabletop exercise and engaging them in full exercises. This is one of the main things I learned early on. When I was at the money management firm, we had a great way of recovering the technology. And we're like, yay, the technology is up. We've done it. We've restored what we have to restore. We replicate what we have to replicate. We restarted services. Yes, I can ping it. Everything's good. And then the whole rest of the business is like, what does that mean? I'm like, yes, we actually have to have operations come in and certify this and turn it over. Okay, fine. We need a few more steps. We need a few more people involved. This is where system owners are engaged and really thinking, again, back to like Bloom's technology, this is where we're looking at apply and analyze. From the BCDR owners, right? CISO on down, whoever the function is who's owning this, these are the folks who are going to have specific BCDR meetings, who are going to be doing after action reports, who are going to be planning the updates, who are going to be distributing that information out. These are the folks who are going to be evaluating the strategies, adjusting the strategies, and really driving things forward. Leading those tabletops, capturing the information. This is how I would recommend getting to that magic number of 5 per month. I do want to say one thing about after action. Incredibly important after action. When do you do an after action? Well, after, obviously. Well, yes. Okay, sure. But how soon after is really important. I don't have good data on this. This is my gut. Your mileage may vary. What I've noticed is if I've done after action right as we've recovered, like the event happened, we've recovered, I've asked people to take notes, now tell me what to fix. I get highly specific, highly tactical answers. This command didn't run, this person was unavailable, this virtual machine's name has changed, the system owners didn't tell us that they're using these other parts of the applications. If, on the other hand, I wait for 2 days, you do the BCDR, I've got approval for HR, and this is another pro tip, you should get approval for HR, that when we've got an incident response or a business continuity exercise, I've got free PTO, I can just throw at my people. You have burned yourself out. Go back to your families. Spend 48 hours. Do not look at a keyboard. Do not pick up your phone. Do not touch a piece of technology. Do whatever you need to do. Sit down and watch cartoons. Open your favorite bottle of bourbon. Sit by the beach. Whatever it is, just do what you need to do and just chill. HR, get them to approve that. Get them to approve that. Make it part of that plan. So when it happens, we can give our people a break. Then I bring those people back. 2 days. That's it. Don't look at it. Don't think about it. Open up your notes. Do an after action. I find when I do that the after action is much more strategic. You know what? We miss some of the things in the command line. So maybe what we should do is just write a script that automates that. You know what? There's some of the things that we did not have included in assets. So what I want to do is just have more of a touch point. When I do that all hands meetings with the process owner, I'm going to ask them, some questions as to what's changed in their environment. It tends to be much more strategic after the event, after we've gotten out of firefighting. Your mileage may vary. I don't have good data on that. That's just what I find. In terms of progress, there's a couple key metrics. Business impact coverage, right, of all those different processes in the BIA, how much are covered by our recovery strategies. Of those scenarios, how many of those scenarios have been covered by recent exercises? How many have we tested? How many have we verified? How many have we cut our teeth on? How many have we walked through? Tactically, percentage of controls being covered. And then we get to things like RTO and RPO. Now you may wonder, hey, Wolf, why didn't you talk about RTO and RPO first? RTO and RPO is what we talk about. Recovery time, recovery point. SLA is what we cover about. How many nines are we measuring to? Which incidentally was what drove that 176 plans. We wanted to make sure that everyone for this organization was meeting the SLAs and the metrics of the organization. Really fun project for me anyways. Maybe not for the people doing it. But I don't believe we can meet those things. I don't believe we can meet those SLAs. We don't first have BIA, scenario coverage, and tactical coverage. I go right back to that data graph I showed in the beginning, which is 80% of the systems covered provided the highest level of assurance. I think we need to start first with coverage and then make sure that we're able to hit those numbers. And then once we have that, we can start embracing chaos. So if you've been following along with chaos engineering, it's been picking up steam. Again, there's a great book from O'Reilly about chaos engineering. This comes from the fine folks at Netflix, back when Netflix had some great content on it. Sorry if there's anyone from Netflix in the audience. But Netflix was like, hey, I'm going to issue a chaos monkey, and it's going to wander around, and this script is going to unplug things and restart services and have bad things happen. Why? Because if there's an outage, if there's a bad bug, we're already familiar as a DevOps team, as a function, on how to respond and recover to that. We're starting to see that same methodology and the same thinking come over to security. How can we use chaos engineering to inject some problems into the environment and then make sure we can recover? When Scientia looked at this, they found that there was a big jump, and people were saying that chaos theory was part of their standard process. I put this last because those same folks were already reporting that they had a very mature BCDR program. I'm very concerned about, we push this down to the junior IT guy. We push this down to the junior security guy. And the junior IT guy and security guy are like, you know what's cool is chaos. And then they adopt chaos engineering and bypass everything else we've talked about. And now we've got things going up and down because they saw a number that was made organizations twice as likely to be highly resilient. That is going to happen. You know it's going to happen. You know it's going to happen in some org. So I want to put this out there that is the direction that people are going in, and it's a really powerful direction, but we got to get the fundamentals first. We've got to have strong bars, a good pile of bananas before we turn the monkey loose. Okay, so that's business continuity. Top down, don't forget to connect the dots. Let's talk a little bit about using this program strategically. For years and years and years, business continuity, disaster recovery. I've liked it. It's fun. We have a drill. We have a clock. We put that clock up there. We count down to the SLA. People are running. It's exciting. It's fun. But a lot of people didn't really think about it. Oftentimes ignore low capability. Until we did this study with Scientia and asked what actually works with security, I honestly had started really forgetting about BCDR. I was very surprised when they came and said, look, when we look at this, there are some 5 practices that are tied with everything we want to do. From enabling the business to managing the risk, there are 5 practices that we found that correlate with driving behavior, and one of them was continuity. Now, when they mapped it out, they came up with this great chart. You can explore this data. It's a bit of an eye chart. What it is the higher the number, the more likely they were to do these various activities. I went and crunched this out and peeled off just resilience. All right, these are the 5 practices that are most related to drive security outcomes, 2 of them being resilience, incident response, and disaster recovery. I peeled those 2 out, and I looked at what organizations were able to do better if they reported that they were more resilient. First thing, they're more likely to gain the confidence of the executive leadership. They're more likely to have peer support. That makes a little bit of sense, right? If you're talking, it's like so many technologists do, about this instance or that instance or this service or that service or the Kafka pipeline, executive leadership is like glazed over. Okay, it sounds like you got that under control. I'll see you later, and they're already out the door. If we're instead talking about technology in terms of what its meaning is to the business, every single time that I was in healthcare, I tied it back to protecting the patients. Every single time I was in money management firm, I tied it back to funds and reputation. I've got a good friend in trucking, and as a CISO, every time he talks about security, he talks about the trucks. The way we get there is by tying that enabling technology up through data flows, up to business processes. I think that's what's driving that. Organizations with resiliency are more likely to keep up with the business and manage top risks. Same thing. We've already thought about some of the impacts, and whether it's a new version of ransomware, or it's a worm, or it's something funky in DNS, if it takes the systems down and we've got to manage that downtime, it's going to have a comparable issue. So I think that's why we're better able to manage risks. Unplanned work and wasted effort is pretty much exactly what we're trying to do. Same thing with losses. More likely to be running cost effectively. This one is intriguing to me. I was working with the North America's headquarters of an international company. They're doing a BIA. And in doing that, they found a large number of redundant applications. Significant number. I think the amount of money they were able to save by consolidation was in the millions. So obviously that money went to the security department, right? That's the way it should work? No, did not. I think they got like a gold star on the review, but you know how it goes. But you're more likely to be able to run cost effectively if you know where those redundancies are and you can work with a team to maintain and manage them. So first get continuity and recovery right, and then use the program strategically. Then use the program to achieve these types of outcomes. We know statistically from a data perspective that these are the outcomes that are possible and are very likely. So get the program running and then make that happen. All right, final thoughts. Continuity and recovery. Recovery, we do bottom up, don't get lost in the weeds. Continuity, we go top down, make sure we're tying those threads and that things are coming together. Common mistakes, get the right person with the right strategies and do the right drills. And then strategically, I just mentioned all the different things that programs can do. So, elevators. When you leave here, you go up to your room or go back to where you come from. The next time you're in an elevator, check out where the elevator is, what elevator manufacturer it is. It might be Otis. I've got a bad habit of doing this. I took my wife for Mother's Day to the San Diego Zoo and had a private tour, and the tour guide was telling me all about the elevators, and she was walking behind me just shaking her head. I feel really bad for her. But I did find there's some really good stuff in the elevators in the zoo, in case you want to know. Why Otis? Otis is interesting because 100 years ago, maybe 150 years ago, Elijah Otis, the namesake, was creating elevators. He would go up on a platform 4 to 6 stories high. They would cut the rope. He would fall. The elevator would miraculously stop. The crowd would cheer. Again, before Netflix, there wasn't a lot of entertainment. This is what they had. Everyone loved it. And what he had invented was not the elevator. Otis did not invent the elevator. He invented the elevator brake. He invented the resiliency that gave people the confidence to use the elevator. And that enabled the last major migration when people moved from country to city and people moved from the ground floor to the top floor because they could trust those elevators. The last major migration about 100 years ago. Of course, we're in the middle of a new migration, not one that's physical, but one that's digital, one where we transact most of our work online, we transact most of our shopping online, our food online, everything online. They asked people in the Valley recently, hey, where are you going to build your next startup? And before the pandemic, it was San Francisco. After the pandemic, online. We're in the middle of the next big migration. What that means is resiliency. The resiliency we build today, the elevator brakes that we develop today, all of us in security, all of us looking at cybersecurity and InfoSec, that resiliency is effectively what's going to make tomorrow's wonders possible. With that, thank you very much. I believe I'm at time. I don't know, are we taking questions or not? I can't see anything.
I have a question.
Sure.
Can we use that anecdote?
No, it's trademarked. You have to pay me 2 Bitcoin. Yeah, of course, absolutely. 100%. All right, well, I hope you guys have a great time. Oh, I really can't see, so you got to yell up. I see you. Yes, sir?
Do you have any strategy
cloud and on-prem?
Yeah, cloud and on-prem. So I've seen ground to cloud where if the on-prem is impacted, there is a process to restore key services in cloud containers. So that is one strategy. The traditional hot site or multiple different sites still works for on-prem. So if we can move that over and we still have like direct pairing with the cloud, that will work. So really what it effectively becomes is the traditional strategies for on-prem, ensuring that they also move with the cloud. Where we get into trouble is the cloud down? We could probably handle that. Is on-prem down? We probably handle that. Is the cloud and on-prem down? That's where we end up in scenarios where I had to move from east to west, and now I don't have direct peering back to my DR data center. So if you grid that out and look at the different fault paths, you can follow that path and make sure you got the right recovery in. All right, with that, I will get off stage. Thank you so much.